Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that thinks the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. We are back with Dr. Judd Burton. We're going to wrap up our discussion of witches and witchcraft. And, for this episode, I think a good way to, kind of land the plane is, we spent a lot of time talking about this historically and anthropologically. And, in the last segment, we talked a little bit about maybe a few points of possible but not necessary overlap with Wicca.
Mm-hmm.
But that sort of left things dangling a little bit, because this is not something that is really experience neutral or process neutral. I mean, there are dangers here to be thinking about. So how would you approach that subject? Somebody walks up to you and would say, "Hey, Judd, I know you study this a lot, and well, that's really cool, and I'm really thinking about getting into this." What would you say to them? I mean, how would you caution them?
Don't do that.
Well,
unless you want to imperil your soul.
Right, that's pretty simple.
Well, and this sort of brings us back again to I like the way you put it, this black market supernatural economy. Because in the case of the primal witch, which in essence is a Luciferian, a satanic witch, you're making compact and
there's two sides to every agreement.
Exactly.
Right.
And so you're unless you repent of it, you have no control over your eternity.
Right. It seems like you can't. How do I put this? The person who's going to go down this road is going down the road because they assume the reality of these things, and maybe they've experienced the reality of these things. So that sort of delegitimizes the retort, "Oh, well, this isn't real. Like, nothing's going to happen." I mean, you can't really have your cake and eat it too. I mean, you can't have what you think is this power engagement, for whatever purpose you want to do, and think that there's no other side of that coin. It's very inconsistent.
One of the points of entry in the modern era for this sort of supernatural exercise is the Ouija board.
Okay.
Now that's something that you can quantify in terms of, if a person, let's say were to go about and build the metrics for it, you could interview a sample of people and ask them whether their experiences were positive or negative. You're going to get a lot of negative experiences.
Yeah, and that's such a familiar example too. And even, again, the point, I think the larger point, especially when it comes to that, is not that there's any, it's a piece of plastic, it's a piece of, there's no power in the board, but it's sort of the solicitous stance, or like this openness to this other thing, that, again, going back to our earlier discussion, again, out of all places, an American Academy of Religion meeting, listening to Jordan Paper in a Q&A talk about how important solicitation was to his religion he was a polytheist. Here's a guy with a PhD who taught at a university for 30 years or whatever, and this is where he's at, and that had to start somewhere. I don't know where it started for him, but the process or the stance, the willingness to engage, is something that does overlap, with what we're talking about here. It's really essential. So that's your first point. Let's not do that.
Well,
again, because you don't know what you're really doing. You don't know what you're playing with.
And even before you get into the supernatural element, we're creatures of five senses. So you want to know what you're getting into business with. By the same token, when people come to Christ, we have a very clear picture of the kind of covenant that we enter into in a salvation experience. If you take that and flip it, the same is true in reverse for whoever is entering into a sort of compact, under the auspices of what I've been calling the primal
Mhm.
witch, or a Luciferian satanic witch, whatever appellation you would call it.
Yeah, and we've had several people, on the show as part of the interview sort of element of the show.
Mhm.
They basically tell us their stories,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think I'm being inaccurate when I say every one of them had this sort of initial interest draw, where again they had to sort of give themselves over to it. They had
Mhm.
to assent to it.
Mhm.
Again, the solicitation is the word we're using, compact or
Mhm.
contract. I mean, there had to be some point of entry with all of them, and it never starts out as this horrible, horrific, sinister
Mhm.
kind of thing. But it again in their stories, it's this. There are certain reasons why it has appeal. You really think you've tapped into something, and you think you're in control, and you think that, I know something that my Christian parents or whatever my neighbor doesn't know, and here I am, the conduit for this, and boy, this is exciting, and
Mhm.
there's any number of ways that you can sort of just get drawn down this path.
Mhm.
So that's something that's really common,
Mhm.
and essential, and you think you might be doing this particular thing and thinking, well, I'm not really that serious about it. But again, depending on what your experience might be, or some other situation that you get thrown in, or something that you overhear that somebody else experiences. I mean, it's a lot more seductive or attractive than you might initially be led to think. And sooner or later, if you're sort of predisposed toward those things or those behaviors, there's a vulnerability there.
And the lure could be, any number of things, but it's often the boon of a kind of secret knowledge, or
Yeah.
supernatural knowledge. And, one of the recent trends has been to, in the West, is for people to look into accessing the supernatural along, the shamanistic route,
Mhm.
taking hallucinogens, like yai or
Right.
ayahuasca. Or the thinking being is that it does, because these chemicals contain dimethyltryptamine, DMT.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about that is that the guy that did most of the work, Strassman, I think is his last name.
Yeah, Rick Strassman.
Yeah, Rick Strassman. He ran a few experiments of priests and pastors and Buddhist monks and things like that praying, and so these chemicals like DMT do elevate on our system. So there could potentially be a kind of neurotheological metric there. Like we are hardwired to be religious in some sort, but when you take that chemical in these quantities, people come out of these experiences talking about encountering these entities, and they come in a number of guises. Some of the most common ones are reptilian or lizard figures, and the sort of shamanistic clown, like you might find amongst the Kachina dancers in the American Southwest. My caveat would be that just as Major Briggs tells Agent Cooper in Twin Peaks, the owls are not what they seem, that they're these demonic creatures. These reptilian entities, these,
whatever it is you're seeing.
clowns, they're not what they seem. And some people come back from these experiences relating that these entities are menacing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any experience with these things. I've never, tried any of these, drugs or anything like that. But I've met a number of people who have, and that's not uncommon. That response is not uncommon at all. And in some cases, people I've talked to, it was so frightening that it was over. Like that just ended it right there. And other people, again, for whatever reason, it didn't. But there are some that are just, yep, this closed the door. Thank you. Thank you for scaring me witless. Out of this whole pursuit. And that was sufficient. This. I did a paper one time. It wound up being a chapter in a book on the Old Testament response to these sorts of things, to divination practices. And invariably, I got into it in that paper because you're asked all the time, well, there's when people are listening to this who might be sort of outside the Christian orbit, one of the things that they reflexively say is, well, the God of the Bible or your God, he just doesn't want you to know things. He just doesn't want you to have these experiences, Again, thinking that this is a good thing, that the evil, sinister killjoy, God of the Old Testament or whatever, doesn't want people to know certain things. And that was really never the logic. The prohibitions that you get in the Old Testament are really about both the human inability to process correctly whatever information is being given. And that was an issue because you could be led astray or harmed. It was never, well, gosh, I'm ticked that you learned something that I didn't teach you myself, and so now I'm going to make a law that says you can't do. It's never that.
Yeah.
And even outside the Bible, you get this sense of it's not just want. I mean, take the God of the Bible out of the picture. There's still like cautionary tales and cautionary even laws and prescriptions about doing this or that, in this area. So it's really not about, again, being a killjoy or forbidding you from something that's good. It's really about, no, you are an embodied human. You judge reality on the basis of the senses that your embodied condition gives you. What makes you think that you could possibly correctly parse something that doesn't conform to the five senses? And most people aren't thinking logically, like that. But again, that is the point. You're not able to really correctly either control the engagement or to understand it, and that makes you, that sets you up to be sort of easy pickings. You're to be a victim, to be harmed.
Certainly.
So again, I don't want to necessarily add. It sounds like you and I are in agreement there. We're tracking along the same sorts of things. Do you have anything, either a friend or yourself or whatever, that you would sort of add as we wrap up the episode? That you would, any episode in life, that contributes to this. Like, I've seen this go bad, or I know this has gone bad. I mean, that you would throw into a discussion with somebody.
As it would happen, I do. One instance comes to mind. It was when I was in college. I was an undergraduate, and I was already researching this stuff pretty heavily anyway. I had a group of friends, and we really felt compelled to look at this stuff through the lens of the Bible. For a time, we did some deliverance ministry. And my brother came to me and asked for some help with a friend of his. And long story short, this individual typified what I call the primal witch in my book. Direct tutelage from an entity, not from a person. You access the spiritual realm for nefarious purposes. And he cast a number of spells on a mutual friend of theirs. And the spell in general was that he have car trouble. I didn't know all of this at the time, but I do remember that this kid wrecked 5 cars that year. Once, twice, maybe, but 5 times. You don't have to have alphabet soup after your name, and your last name doesn't have to be Van Helsing to figure out that there's definitely something there, some malevolent force behind all that. And as it turns out, he was demonized. Thankfully, he was delivered later.
You're talking about the guy who was casting.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So absolutely. I mean, that's one instance of a number, but that one has always stood out in my mind as one of the starkest examples.
Well, I think, again, this will be a helpful way to sort of wrap up, the topic. We want to be clear that, you can look at it again in a detached way, academically, and get into the history and understand, the not only just history in terms of events, but in terms of ideas, cultures. All that's important, to really kind of being able to, both speak the language and parse the language of discussion,
Sure.
about a different topic. But this is not something that we want anybody, in our audience, to be involved with and play around with.
Right. And you can certainly, when you're looking at those things, you can look at the scholastic element of it and marry it with the biblical worldview. I think that's a lot of what this program tries to do.
Yeah, and I mean so I'm glad we had this session, to make that clear and just sort of reinforce that point. So thanks again for being with us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you once again for watching Fringe Pop 321. Please visit our website, fringepop321.com. And if you're interested in supporting what we do here on the show, and we hope that you are, please visit fp321.com/S as in Sam, 321, fp321.com/S. And please come back and watch more episodes, because what you know may not be so.